Welcome to the Society of Fantasy Fanatics podcast, where two BFFs, KJILO,
That's me,
and Ailsa Bristow, that is me, deep dive into lore, romance, theories, and much more from your favorite fantasy reads. Before we get into today's content, don't forget to give us a like, drop a comment, and of course, subscribe. All of these help us continue growing the channel and keep bringing you content that you love. So today we are talking about Throne of Glass, which is book one in the Throne of Glass series. Oh, look, we have both the OG cover and the update. Oh, wait, no. Is yours an update and mine's the UK cover? There we go.
You have the special UK one.
There we go. Fancy. So, Throne of Glass. This is the first book in the Throne of Glass series, published by, of course, Sarah J. Maas. This book first came out in 2012, or should we say first came out in book format in 2012. It was originally published, I think it was on Fiction Press, but don't quote me on that. So kind of like on a self-published, serialized basis where Sarah J. Maas built up her original fan base, caught a lot of attention, and then got picked up by Bloomsbury to start publishing this as a series. So we're going to talk about this today. We're going to get right into it. And we're going to start off with giving you a bit of a summary of what happens in this book.
Of course, as with all of our episodes, this comes with major spoilers. We'll be chatting about the entire scope of Throne of Glass, including the ending, some Easter eggs, and a lot of goodies in between. Throne of Glass revolves around the main character, 18-year-old Celaena Sardothian, who is an orphan and an assassin. When we first meet Celaena, she is an incarcerated slave in the salt mines of Endovier, who is then collected by the Crown Prince of Adarlan and is captain of the guard, his surly captain of the guard. I have to add that in there. He is not a pleasant guy. Celaena is then to become the prince's champion in a competition that the king of Adarlan is hosting in order to find the best and most ruthless, more importantly, killer in all of Aurelia, to work for him for a number of years as is basically his indentured killer. Sounds appealing.
So appealing.
But
for Celaena, it is very appealing because it's also very unlikely that she is going to survive the salt mines much longer. She's already been there a year and she's outlived most of the other slaves. When she is taken to the capital of Aurelia, Adarlan, she is preened, prepped, and trained for a series of tests, the purpose of which is to eliminate the contenders. These tests include climbing, archery, swordplay, etc. Basically, it's gym class on steroids. Again, what a treat. And unsurprisingly, Celaena is extremely skilled, if a bit cocky and even more arrogant. While she is there, she is taken under Prince Dorian Havilard's wing, and the two soon strike up a friendship. Additionally, she is trained by the captain of the guard, Kale Westfall, who seems crustier than a soggy bowl of frosted flakes left out in the sun too long. As the training and tests progress, there are a couple of subplot lines that percolate to the surface. The first is the fact that contestants, who are made up of what appears to be only the grimiest of grimes in the world of killers, are being slaughtered. And when I say slaughtered, I mean gross. There are entrails involved, friends. Yes. Kale is tasked with the investigation, and of course, Celaena inserts herself into that investigation because she's nosy, and obviously, so are we, the readers. We need to know what's going on. The second is a mysterious tunnel hidden behind a tapestry in Celaena's bedroom in the palace. One night, as Celaena is feeling curious and showing zero regard for self-preservation, she decides to take a venture down this tunnel. Oh, and she's having dreams that tell her to do this, as one does.
Just sideline.
You know, that old nutshell. When she reaches the end of one of the passageways that seems to burrow under the old part of the palace, she stumbles across a chamber containing two sarcophagi. And here's a description from page 183. Trees were carved into the stone ceiling, and they stretched above the sleeping female figure. A second sarcophagus had been placed beside the woman, depicting a man. Why was the woman's face bathed in moonlight and the man's in darkness?
Ooh, I love it. So, in both carvings, each is wearing a crown. And when she inspects the woman closer, she sees, and this is a quote, the ears of the Fae, the immortal. But no Fae had married into the Haviliard line for 1,000 years. And there had been only one, and she was a half breed at that. We learned these two sarcophagi contain Gavin, the first king of Adarlan, and this was Elena, the first princess of Terrasen, Brennan's daughter and Gavin's wife and queen. I know it's a very complicated family line. Both of these facts are important to note, though, because 10 years prior to the start of the novel, the king of Adarlan outlawed magic, and the Fae are basically made of magic. So it's not great for them. In Adarlan, and all of Aurelia, the continent for that matter, the Fae are only whispers, rumors, bedtime stories. So we know, though, that Selena is from Terrasen, and the coat of arms of Terrasen also contains a tree. A nod to the line of Terrasen, perhaps?
Theories aside, down in the chamber, Elena's spirit appears to Selena, and throughout the course of the novel, she becomes a bit of a mentor and a guide for Selena, although not necessarily one that Selena always trusts. But Elena has some instructions for Selena. She says that she must win the championship and become the king's champion, and she must investigate the murders that have been happening. And there, we're led to believe that the murders are connected with a great ancient evil that has awoken. And of course, our cantankerous, arrogant, swashbuckling heroine must be the one to solve the mystery.
Yes, obviously. Otherwise, why would we be reading this? But really, against the backdrop of all the Easter eggs that are woven into the story, history, and lore that Maas offers in the novel, these plots seem like a drop in a massive Maasverse ocean, which of course is what we're going to dig into as well. Maas has built a multiverse of worlds that we can see even in her very first novel that she wrote as just a kid. She was already planting the seeds for. So there are a few things that we loved. I mean, there are a few things that we weren't so fancy about the novel, but we're going to start with what we loved about Throne of Glass. Do you want to lead us off, Ilsa?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is so much in this book to enjoy, and certainly the first time I read it, I was all over it. Um, but I think like the main thing is we've got a really rich world here. This is like my favorite thing about these books that we've just got a really, really interesting world. We've got a lot of mystery. We've got a lot of things to uncover. So, what you were just talking about, the fact that there's all of these Easter eggs, there's this big universe that's being built, I think that for me is the most enticing thing about these or this book. Yeah, I just think there's so much here to get your teeth into. So while I wasn't necessarily a huge fan of rereading the book, I can appreciate what it's setting up and what it's establishing for what we're going forward.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with you. There was so much that I loved about this book. That although there is plenty that I did not love at all, which I mean we're gonna dig into, so we are in agreement. But my biggest love of this book is how Maas wrote a main female character who can get messy. I think that's impressive. Selena is someone who can fight alongside the best of them. She isn't afraid to get bloody. She takes some serious pummeling near the end and is covered in scars.
Mm.
While admittedly these aren't amazing for anyone, writing a main female character like this, particularly back when Maas did, we're talking like the early 2010s, and she was so young, is a positive step forward, I think, in fantasy.
Mm.
But don't get me wrong, there are a lot of books now that do this. But coming from my generation, when I was reading fantasy novels where women could only play a role where they needed the protection of men, it was refreshing to read the first time around. I couldn't help but cheer on Selena and the lore. Oh man, the lore is so good. I love the world she's built. There's so much mystery and magic in this world. The Easter eggs of the Fae and ancient magic and gods really had me swooning, to be honest, and a little jealous as a writer. Um, these are the aspects that kept me reading throughout the entire series.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I think we've already alluded to the fact that we do have some critique, though. But let's move into our next segment.
Yeah, okay. So, because we are talking about a vast, sprawling series, we're going to do some character deep dives today, which is not something we've done before in our episodes, but it seems to make sense for a book and a series of this length. And so, because Throne of Glass, both the single book and the series, is so complex with so many characters and points of view, we're going to start with a little bit of a Cole's note on the characters because this definitely, almost definitely, won't be our last of the deep dives from this series. So,
Mhm.
Maas is known for her multiple, many points of view. Certainly in her later novels, it can become difficult to keep track of the who, the what, the where. But thankfully, in Throne of Glass, there are only really a few characters we need to introduce and really pay attention
Mhm.
to. And we're going to unpack them here because trust us, we're going to need these Coles notes later on. Okay, so KJ,
Yeah.
kick us off.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously, we're going to start with Selena Sardothian. Selena is about 18 years old. She's just a kid. Like, and let's keep remembering that throughout the entire episode. Her homeland is Terrasen, which 10 years ago was invaded and taken over by the king of Adarlan. All the old and ruling families were slaughtered in one night, including all the royals. Selena somehow escaped, and at just 8 years old, she was found on the bank of an icy river by none other than the king of the assassins himself, Arabid Hamel. For the next 8 or 9 years, Selena was personally trained, mentored, and guided by Arabin, who also seemed like a bit of an asshole and frequently abused her. But I mean, that's just a side note. All in the name of making her into a better killer, because why not? Selena's skills seem pretty unprecedented, though. She has unusual strength for someone so small and slight. She is wickedly fast with cunning instincts. Her aim is also frighteningly good, as is her skills with nearly every single weapon with a blade. Yeah, she's dangerous.
She is one tough cookie.
Yeah.
However, despite being so tough, 1 year prior to the events of Throne of Glass, Selena was sold out by one of her assassin colleagues, tried for murder, and found guilty. The boy she loved, Sam, was killed during this whole showdown, while Selena got shipped off to the salt mines of Endovia, which is a near death sentence.
Mhm.
However, she survived longer than anyone else has survived the salt mines. And in order to survive, she draws on her own personal motto that we see over and over again through the books: I will not be afraid. And actually, speaking of
Mhm.
things we love, I love every time this motto comes
Yeah,
up.
same.
So, yeah, this becomes kind of her returning motto throughout the course of the series. So, we'll hear that again. Physically, Selena is about average height, very slim, with long blonde hair and the most unusual eyes, turquoise with a ring of gold in the middle. And we all know that Maas loves to make eye color significant.
Hmm.
As for her personality, Selena is a mix between arrogance, humor, childishness. Again, remembering she's only 18 and very traumatized to boot, and intelligent. She maybe lacks some wisdom, though.
Like a
That's
lot.
going to be part of her character. She loves reading. She has a sweet tooth. She doesn't trust easily, but when she trusts someone, and more importantly, loves someone, she is incredibly loyal. She is also, and again, we're going to keep harping on this today, barely an adult. She never had a childhood and is, in many ways, still a child herself. She seems to be a creature of many secrets.
So Dorian is the crown prince of Adarlan and a total rake. He's smooth as silk, gorgeous, and entirely charming. He's also Adarlan's most eligible bachelor, a status which it seems Dorian doesn't want to change. The bachelor part, not the eligible. Um, but we don't really blame him because, again, he's only 19. Like, let him live a little. I don't know. Other than the fact that he does love reading and has midnight dark hair and sapphire blue eyes, which Maas lets us know on more than one occasion. Again, eyes. There really doesn't seem to be much going on beneath the surface. Or is there? Dun dun
Hmm.
dun dun. Again, spoilers. Also, again, the sapphire eyes. I mean, I want to know what sapphire eyes actually look like because I don't know if anybody in real life actually has sapphire eyes, but
Yeah.
we're going to go with it. Disbelief is still suspended. Sapphire eyes, black hair are a major Easter egg, in our opinion, and also the entirety of the interwebs. We will talk about this soon. So, to Selena's initial disgust, she's kind of attracted to Dorian. I mean, like, sapphire eyes, like tall, dark, and handsome, like whatever. But the feeling is also mutual. He's very attracted to her too.
Mm,
So there's Dorian.
what could happen?
What could happen?
Okay, I'm going to talk to us about Kale Westfall, aka Cole, aka
Chol.
Campbell.
Everyone has a different pronunciation. Chol.
Yeah. But we're going with Kale. Kale Westfall is from the noble family that rules the region of Aniel. He is the eldest son of the Lord of Aniel. However, he has given up his right to the title of the Lord in order to serve as the captain of the guard for the King of Adelan. Kale is also Dorian's best friend, and it would appear takes some serious license in dishing out to Dorian just as much as Dorian dishes to him. As for his personality, in all honesty, Kale is a little bit of a wet blanket. He is crusty, cantankerous, judgy, and apparently a complete bore. He follows the rules, and those rules are his moral compass, even if the rules may not have a moral compass to begin with. Yeah.
It's like, dude,
Oh,
what are you
oh,
doing?
Kale.
Okay, oh, Chol.
Despite his spiky demeanor, however, he and Selena do end up becoming friends.
And speaking of friends, I am going to butcher her last name. Nehemia Gitter. 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 I don't know who's to know. We're going to just call her Nehemia. Nehemia is the Princess of Islay, a region in Aurelia. Islay was one of the few remaining independent ish kingdoms left, and also a hotbed of potential rebellion. Nehemia has been brought to Adarlan court supposedly to improve her language skills. I don't know, I think that's a thin excuse, but something she might be actually aligned with rebels from her homeland, like hello, writings on the wall. She and Selena quickly see, like, again, written by a very young person for young people. She and Selena quickly hit it off and with their shared love of being awesome with weapons and verbally sparring with the men around them.
I mean,
Seems good. Why not?
shared interests, right?
Exactly.
Okay, next up we have the King of Adelan, who is a nameless Haviliard. So the king, aka Dorian's dad, aka the dude who has ambitions to rule over the whole world, yep, he's a bit of an asshole. He is cold and cruel and also mysteriously likes to disappear off on missions where his entire royal guard ends up dead. Who knows? There's clearly something going on with him, but we don't get to learn too much about him in this book, other than the fact he seems to be the person that Selena is most afraid of.
Yeah, and speaking of being afraid, let's talk about Duke Parrington. Heebie jeebies, Duke. So, the Duke is a member of the King's Council and part of a faction that wants to put down Islay once and for all. He stands in opposition to Dorian and has his own champion in the King's competition and will stop at nothing to take out Selena. Why? Maybe because she's a girl. We do not know.
Who knows?
Speaking of girls,
Okay, we are going to talk about another member of the royal court of Adelan, and that is Caltaine Rompierre. She is a noblewoman within the court. She appears to be aligned with Duke Parrington, and in fact seems to have some sort of attachment to him. But once we get to know Caltaine a bit, it becomes clear that her sights are set elsewhere, on Prince Dorian. But
mhm.
Caltaine isn't just a silly lady of the court. She seems to be hiding more than meets the eye. She suffers from these mysterious headaches and is always smoking her pipe. And sometimes she hears the beating of wings. Now, what's that about?
Ooh, what indeed? So, speaking of what's that about, let's talk about Elena Havillard, our ghostly, frustrating, elusive friend, Elena, who would be eternally hard pressed to deliver a straightforward answer, even if her life or afterlife depended on it, which it doesn't. She's dead. You know, just, I mean, details. Elena was one of the last Fae Queen of Adarlan through marriage to her human consort, King Gavin, and she was also the Princess of Terrasen by birth. She was also a fierce warrior and gifted with extraordinary magic. She also seems to take a vested interest in Selena. Who knows why? Curiously enough, it would also seem that Dorian is her distant descendant. Interesting. No?
Hmm.
Speaking of family.
So we also have King Gavin Haviliard. King Gavin, the human king of Adelan, the first king of Adelan, is basically an off-the-page character in this book. Doesn't really play any role in Throne of Glass, except for in passing mention. However, we're mentioning him again here because we need to keep this guy in our minds as the series progresses.
And more family. This is all about a very strange family tree. We have King Brennan, Fae father of Elena Galathinius Haviliard. Say that 3 times fast. And King of Terrasen. He fought against a mighty evil 1,000 years ago. Not much else is said about him in Throne of Glass. He's, again, one of those mysterious off page characters.
And one last character to mention, Aelin Galathinius herself. She is the lost princess of Terrasen and the rightful queen, but she's not been seen in a decade, so who knows where she is or what might be going on with
Who knows?
her.
I mean, everybody knows,
Everybody
but
knows. Oh,
we're
maybe
just
not. There
gonna
might be people here who haven't
maybe,
seen or haven't read Throne of Glass yet, but
yeah, but maybe not.
but also, I'm sorry if you're here and we're just spoiling the whole book for you.
We did warn you.
Yes.
Spoilers.
Okay.
So, I mean, this series has a lot of history for a lot of people out in the interwebs. For some people, it was actually their first foray into fantasy. And we have both come into this series at a different stage of our Maasverse journey and in our reading and fantasy and life journey, to be honest. So, we have different experiences of it and some differing opinions, although mostly, again, as friends do, we usually agree. This is why we do this together. So I'll start off here. I started my Massverse journey completely backwards with Crescent City Book One. I don't know why I did that. Obviously, I had little idea of what I was getting myself into, and I didn't understand a lot of the lore and fan theories that were floating around. And there are a lot of them. You can go down a rabbit hole on a Saturday night. So after reading Crescent City 1, I decided to try Throne of Glass, and it is remarkable how different the two books are for a couple of reasons. First, it was very clear to me that Maas wrote Throne of Glass when she was, again, very, very young, which is both an absolutely incredible feat, but also it definitely flavors Selena's personality in a way that I'm not sure Maas intended herself. At times, for me, Selena came off as a bit too arrogant, too cocky, and to be honest, immature. It kind of annoyed me. But again, it's also important to remember that, and I constantly had to remind myself of this, that Selena is a child. She's 18, right?
Mhm.
And past the age of 8, she had no positive role models in her life. She lives with some pretty serious trauma. Her coping mechanisms are basically arrogance and self preservation. And sometimes for me, that just became way too grating. Having said that, I also felt that her character was a bit flat in Throne of Glass. I know she has secrets, and I actually know what they all are, having read the entire series and access to the internet. But her character arc for me was just too flat in the first book. I also realized that this book is not all about character development, though. That comes later in the series. I still feel like she's flat, but that's a side note. Now, looking at the two books together in my journey, Throne of Glass and Crescent City 1, the latter is much more mature, but there is still this overtone that Mass has written the same character, only older, as in Bryce Quinlan, the main character of Crescent City 1, is older, but they are the same people. They just have different hair color. Having said all of this, will I keep reading Mass books? Yeah, I will. I don't know why specifically, except the universe she's building is outstanding, and that's pretty much where I am with that. What
Mhm.
about you?
Yeah, so for me, Throne of Glass was my first introduction to the Massverse. I inhaled all of the available books that were available at that time in a 2 week period in December of 2016. And then I read the last two books in the series as they were released in 2017 and 2018. I was totally hooked, went on to read and love the Akatar series. But I've often gone around saying that Throne of Glass is my favorite series of
Mhm.
the Massverse because it's where I started. It's where I fell in love. Um, Side note: I have read Crescent City One, but I kind of noped out of it. I did not enjoy that book. It was kind of a bummer for me because I did feel like a big Mass fan after reading Throne of Glass and Akatar. But Crescent City didn't do it for me, and everything I've read about the series so far hasn't convinced me to go and pick it up again. Anyway, it was interesting for me to come back and reread Throne of Glass now, 8 years after I first picked it up. It was actually much less engaging than I remembered. I think a lot of what you talked about, KJ, there about how Selena feels very immature, how she doesn't have that much character development in this book, rings very true for me as well. I was also surprised to find a little bit of the writing is a bit clunky. And again, so young when she wrote this. I feel like we have to keep saying this, and I
Yeah.
so wholeheartedly respect Sarah J. Maas's accomplishment with this book and with her career in general. But this book can be a bit clunky in places, and I was a bit about it. So it was really
Mhm.
interesting, and I'm curious now to see how the rest of the series holds up because I do have very fond memories of reading it back in 2016, but I have not read it since.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way, although I've been changing my mind actually in a shorter period of time. I finished reading the series, at the beginning of this year, and already I have a different perspective going back and rereading the first book in the series. So I'd be interested to see how the rest of it holds up for me as well. And again, like Crescent City series was hard for me to get through. It was a lot. Anyways, we're going to dive into some of the meaty stuff now that we as writers and voracious readers, we love to get into the weeds, the themes, the tropes, that sort of thing. So I'm really excited for this part. There are many themes and tropes in Throne of Glass, and indeed the entire series that can be unpacked. But we're going to go through only a couple of them that really stood out for us and that impacted our reading experience. So the first one that we both noticed was the not like other girls trope. So again, one more time, we need to acknowledge how young Mass was when she wrote this. She was only 16. Like that's bananas. I don't know what I was doing at 16. Well, it did take, I know, right? While it did take her a long time to finish the novel we know and love today, reading it against the backdrop of a teenager's mind can help us flesh out and really understand some of these tropes that crop up in the book, which may not have even been conscious choices on Mass's part. And I don't think that the not like other girls trope was conscious. Funny enough, as I was doing some research to get more clarification on the not like other girls trope, I Googled literally not like other girls trope definition. And lo and behold, the fourth link that came up was an article written by yours truly, our very own Ailsa Bristow, which is bananas. The fourth one that came up.
I'm an
Like that's
SEO queen.
you are an SEO queen. So I was like, oh, I got to do this. So, at the risk of completely embarrassing her, I'm going to use this article because I think it was damn good and it clarified everything for me. Also, we're putting a link below in the resources so you know what we're talking about. So, I'm quoting my BFF here. Meet our heroine. She is an outcast, but that's okay because she's deep. She's got skills that make her stand out. She's smart, too. You won't see her getting hung up on all that superficial stuff like relationships or fashion or diets or makeup or shoes. Maybe she's a free spirit, a little bit wild. In fact, it's part of her rejection of all this superficial stuff that marks her out as our heroine as soon as she steps onto the page. You see, she's not like other girls. I mean, that like resonates pretty well. And I love this quote because it pretty much sums up Selena. Although Selena does love her fashion, she does love shopping, which is fair. But this is why it stands out. On page 75, when we first meet Keltaine Rompier, the young woman from the court of the King Adarlan, Selena says, get ready, I hate women like that. They're so desperate for the attention of men that they'd willingly betray and harm members of their own sex. And we claim men cannot think with their brains. At least men are direct about it. Pause. Oh.
So, yeah, it's really interesting, this trope. I think it
Mm.
also combines with the kind of strong female character. I don't know if we want to call that a trope, but it kind of fits into, they fit together, not like other girls and I'm a strong female character, kind of merge
Yeah.
in one. And so Mass is on record as saying she deliberately set out to write a strong female protagonist. And I have a quote here from an interview that Mass did way back when. So she said, well, there was never any option not to have a strong and capable female protagonist. I just wasn't interested in writing a story where my heroine was anything but strong. And I'm not talking about merely physical strength here, especially since I've never been particularly interested in reading stories about wishy washy heroines, too. I grew up fiercely jealous that boys got to do all the fun things. I wanted to be Luke battling Vader or Prince Philip slaying Maleficent. So writing a novel allowed me to actually immerse myself in a story where the girl got to do all the awesome stuff, to the point where I had to continually remind myself to let the guys do some badass stuff every now and then. So I think that quote shows you where some of the issues with both Not Like Other Girls and strong female character tropes run into trouble. It's this
Mhm.
kind of third wave feminism, 90s era girl power that suggests that in order to be powerful, women have to not be like other women, they have to be like men. Also,
Mm.
hello, gender binary. It's so good to see you. And by good
Yes.
to see you, I mean, it's so
Get out of
predictable
that
to
room.
see you.
Yeah.
um,
Yep.
but yeah, so I think we see here that, she's not saying, I wanted to see a gender bent Star Wars where a woman got to be the lead. I wanted to be Luke, right? Like
Mhm.
there's a subtle difference in that. Um, Anyway, so I think there's some issues there, but also let's put it into context. This trope is incredibly common in the fantasy faves of the early 2000s, early 2010s. We're talking Hunger Games, Divergent, Twilight. To some extent, all of their heroines are not like other girls and they're strong female characters.
Mhm.
It's also really complicated, this trope, because we know that Mass wanted to have Selena be a typical teenager. So, KJ, you mentioned before, like, Mass did put in some things that made her like other girls. So we get her obsession with fashion and sugary
Mhm.
treats. I have some thoughts about this, but that's
Yeah.
definitely
Diet
another
culture.
rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But it's all kind of surface level, right? It's not There's not like a true connection between Selena and other women, I would argue, or other girls. It's just like surface, like, look, she loves fashion.
Mhm.
However, I'm not trying to criticize Mass personally here. I'm not calling her a bad feminist. I think what's actually really interesting is how hard it is for a writer to create complex female characters from without falling into these traps. Even when a writer is intentionally trying to
Mhm.
go against stereotypes about women and trying to write a strong character, all of this, these traps are still there waiting for you. And this, friends, is what it feels like to be living under patriarchy.
Yes.
So, my personal beef with the Not Like Other Girls trope is that it sets up women as rivals to one another. We saw that in the quote that KJ read about Keltane. It
Mhm.
elevates one special woman and sets all other women as an example against her.
I am in agreement with you. There are some aspects that I would change a little bit, in my opinion. So I think that writing Not Like Other Girls' character is not necessarily bad as long as the author is doing it intentionally and with the purpose of using it as a character growth or perhaps downfall. there is a responsibility placed on the writer to acknowledge this and in some way weave it into the text. That's where I think a not like other girls trope could actually
Mm.
benefit, right? And we can learn something from it, even in fantasy. Yes, there is lots to be learned in fantasy. So, for these purposes, think of Keltane and the other women of the court. They live in an extremely patriarchal world. Again, there's patriarchy everywhere. Their very safety and security is at the whim of men. They must be attractive, young, agreeable, social, and naturally must shine above the rest. Hello again. This is like gender roles. These women are pitted against each other in this system. They are the product of a world built by men. But and there's a lot of juiciness that Maas could have really sank her teeth into there. But Selena blames the women of the court for behaving in such a way that really they don't have a choice in.
Mm.
It is literally their survival. And again, like Elsa said, welcome to patriarchy. We should just have like sparkly patriarchy. I'm not that good with Canva though. Um, so again, I think it's okay for a character to have the perspective that Selena does. In fact, I think it makes for a very flawed character, which is always ideal. However, again, I will reiterate this, the author has a responsibility to in some way acknowledge that the position women are put in this world is not their fault or responsibility. It's not their responsibility also to change the system too.
Mm.
For some growth of the character to come, we need some growth of the character to come to acknowledge that as well. So we need Selena to find this growth. The writer has all the power here. And as authors, we do have a responsibility with the messages that we're sending in our books. We can't just write willy nilly, right? We have lots of readers. What message are we sending? And by extension, what message is Maas sending?
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point to think about. And I think actually, if we think about some of Sarah J. Maas's later books, we actually see she does maybe a better job of this trope.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking, for example, in Akatar, we have three female characters who are all not exactly like other girls, but they see the strengths in each other. They are different to each other and they support one another. So I'm thinking of the Night Court and the female members of the
Mm-hmm.
Night Court. So I think this is maybe, again, we've said it a million times, maybe this is a little bit about Maas's development as a writer, her maturity as a writer. But I think exactly what you said, it's really important the writers acknowledge the agency they have. It's not just like, oh, the trope says I had to do this, right? We have
Mm-hmm.
choices that we make when we write, and we have responsibilities too. So I really appreciate that point and that perspective that you shared, KJ.
Well, thank you. Um, I worked hard on that. So, as the novel progresses, however, we didn't get any character growth at all. Selena never changes, and that really frustrated me. And even throughout the series, I find that she doesn't change much. She, for the most part, blames the other women of the court for behaving the way they do. In fact, as the series progresses, the only women we see as heroines are the ones who have broken free from this abusive world and are therefore heroes because of it. The rest, the victims of men's bad behaviors, are to be scorned. That's a problem. And this is where the problem lies. Carrying this forward, the only other woman in the Throne of Glass novel who Selena respects is also part of this trope for, I would argue, even more problematic reasons. Nehemia. Nehemia is clearly a Black woman from a territory that has been colonized, although not entirely overruled by Adarlan. Its citizens are either slaughtered or taken as slaves. Maas writes this land as somehow exotic, carrying this through to her characterization of Nehemia. There doesn't seem to be much other reason for Selena to gravitate towards Nehemia other than Nehemia's difference, i.e., her race. On page 101, Nehemia uses language that also very closely resembles a greeting or a phrase from Islam. Nehemia says to Selena, "Peace be with you," which is very close to the phrase, "Peace be upon you." This seems to be cultural appropriation. Therefore, Nehemia becomes the token Black character and sort of a monolith of everyone who isn't white. neglecting cultural and racial nuances, but simply the other. And because of that otherness, she is someone who Selena can relate to. However, in truth, Selena can't because she is a white woman. Mass further, really digging in here, Maas further writes Nehemia in a white lens stereotypical way. Nehemia hides her very considerable intelligence from the rest of the court. She pretends she can't speak the common language of Adarlan, pretends to be ignorant, speaking slowly while others generally tend not to speak to her, or if they do, it is also very slowly, almost as though they were speaking to a child.
It's not great.
It's not great. It doesn't look good.
So Selenia and Nehemia strike up what appears to be a very close friendship. However, and at the complete risk of alienating Mass fans everywhere, we don't necessarily buy it. The majority of the friendship happens off page, and the reader is trusted to simply fill in the blanks and believe it. Most of what we see from Selena and Nehemia is their mutual abhorrence of the court, the people of the court, and Adelan, which is understandable. Don't get us wrong, but there's not a lot of bonding there that we see. On
No.
top of that, it doesn't really seem like Selena ever really does much for Nehemia. It's Nehemia who does a lot of the emotional and mental labor for Selena. We don't really get any insight into Nehemia's homeland, her family, her hobbies, her interests. We don't know anything about her family. Why? Because it would appear Selena never asks. These are just the tip of the iceberg for a friendship. So, what do we have if not that? Having said that, Maas does cast Nehemia as not like other girls as well. In trying to make Nehemia nuanced and different, what she really has done is othered her without offering much by way of nuance. There's a lot about Nehemia's character that Maas could have dug into, but Nehemia really only exists to push Selena, the white heroine, forward. And again, it's okay to love these novels. Mass has adoring fans. I think KJ and I would both consider ourselves fans of Sarah J. Maas. But that doesn't mean that as readers, we shouldn't acknowledge and talk about the problematic elements in the novels. Two truths that seem contradictory can, in fact, exist together.
Yeah, it's big, big red flag.
Yeah.
It's a
Just
red
wave
flag.
out red flag.
Just wave it.
Okay, we're going to talk about another trope now that plays a big role in Throne of Glass, and that is the idea of the competition. This is a super common trope, especially in YA fantasy titles. For this section, I'm pulling from an article that Nicola over at Thoughts on Fantasy put together on this trope and why it is so popular, and we will link that down below in our resources section. So, in the article, Nicola gives a couple of examples of the competition trope and why it works. It can be a way of showing coming of age, it can introduce us to the chosen one, it can be part of a rebellion, and specifically for our purposes, it can give us the high stakes competition. Selena, in this book, faces some pretty high stakes if she doesn't win the competition. She'll be shipped back to Endovia, where the likelihood of her survival is razor thin. As a literary trope, though, the high stakes competition serves two main purposes. It adds ticking time tension. This is when there's like a metaphorical clock ticking down to the big bad disaster, the ultimate conflict. Ticking time tension ramps up the regular tension into overdrive, and it works really, really well in a fantasy book like Throne of Glass. The second reason it works really well is it gives a defined time frame in which the action of the novel will happen. Entry into the contest, participation, other subplot lines, the final trial, or the test in Selena's case all have to happen within the time frame set by the competition. And to be honest, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who doesn't love watching the hero or heroine in this case beating every single odd and winning the entire thing. The proof is in the pudding about how popular and successful this trope is. And again, you can see the popularity of this in books written around and after the time when Throne of Glass was written and published. So here's just a few examples of other competition and or selection novels that both were and are still hot. So we have Hunger Games, all about the competition, Divergent, a selection novel, The Red Queen, which I believe is a competition. Yes, scanning my memory of reading that book.
Not read it.
Selection, a selection novel, and
What?
the Legendborn series by Tracy Dion, which that series is actually far more recent and features a black character. Side note, and that's just scratching the surface. There are many, many more. So once Maas has set Selena up as the winner of the competition, this also paves the way for Maas to further set her up as the chosen one. We've seen her skills, we've seen the magic that happens around her. It's undeniable once she's conquered the odds of this competition that there is something special about her. I actually find it pretty interesting that this trope had such a moment in the late thousands, early tens. I don't know exactly why it hit that zeitgeist, but maybe the grueling experience of young adulthood in this period. As somebody who was a young adult in this period, I'm thinking about like
Yeah.
the competition of schoolwork, the pressure of exams, college applications, living in a post-recession,
Mhm.
anxiety-fueled world. Like maybe that had something about it. The idea that if you could just be good enough, you could win the special prize.
Could also be social media really started ramping up. What was it?
Like
Facebook came out in
2006.
2006, 2007.
Yeah.
Huge competition
Yeah, so
being
there's maybe like a
online.
lot of factors that kind of
Yeah.
fueled like writers being interested in this and it having a little bit
Yeah.
of a zeitgeist moment.
I bet you sociologists have studied this. They
Probably.
should. We should tell them to.
We'll just
The
ring up
sociologists.
the Society of
The
Sociologists. Hello.
sociologists. Hello, we have an idea.
Yeah. They've got a hotline, right? For
Yeah,
that.
they got it. The sociology hotline. Can you please do this? We need to know.
All right.
Yeah. Well, we also know, like, I mean, it's fantasy. Sarah J. Maas has a world filled with magic. There is a magic, kind of complicated magic systems in Throne of Glass. Moving on to the next aspect, we're going to talk about the magic system. Of course, this is fantasy. Of course, there's going to be magic. And Sarah J. Maas, she writes some pretty cool magic systems that are deeply embedded in her lore, in her multiverse. While it doesn't seem that it's actually that well developed in Throne of Glass, the first book, there's a good reason for that. Magic is outlawed. Ever since the King of Adarlan went on his murderous conquest of the kingdoms, magic wielding has been punishable by death. It has also mysteriously disappeared. Like
Hmm.
people who can't, like the Fae, cannot use magic. So why has it disappeared? What do we know right now? The Fae, who seem to have all but disappeared, except to Wendlin, which is this rumored place across the ocean, the sea, has extraordinary magic. There's also something called the word marks, although which interestingly enough are Viking and Celtic, I do believe, and other mythologies, and it's not pronounced word, it's pronounced weird. It's like it's not wyvern, it's not wyvern, it's wyvern. There's like this huge debate. It's wyvern. No, I said wyvern. Anyways, it's pronounced in our world. It's pronounced weird. The weird marks, the weirding. But we digress. I digress. Shockingly, I digress. There are also the creepy clock towers. Creepy. On page 31, we have this quote. Within a month of the king's proclamation, magic had completely and utterly disappeared of its own accord. Perhaps it had realized what horrors were coming. Bah! The big question that this begs, of course, is where has the magic gone? Now, again, there are a lot of Easter eggs. This is very scratching the surface and a lot of theories we can dive into. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing in our next episode. Like, literally, it's all going to be Easter eggs and theories. So make sure, again, you subscribe. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. That's magic for now. See ya, folks.
Yes. Okay, we are going to talk about romance in this book now. So, unlike the other Maas novels, Throne of Glass is pretty light on the romance, and there are precisely zero spicy scenes. Again, remembering Maas was young when she wrote this, it was initially marketed as YA, still marketed as YA, maybe.
I think they shifted it to adult. I
Okay,
think it's simply for marketing purposes. So if you look for Sarah J. Maas, you have
okay,
all of her books in one. Although
interesting.
this series is YA.
Yes,
It is YA.
but regardless of whether there's spice or not, if it's a mass novel, we know there's going to be at least a little bit of romance. And for me, one of my favorite things about Mass as a writer is that romance isn't just a one and done deal. We do not have our 18-year-old heroine falling in love for the first time and that being the end game. I appreciate that we get to see Selena explore romantic possibilities and we get to learn about her romantic history as well. When a new love comes along, that doesn't negate the previous relationships the heroine has had. To me, this is really a total breath of fresh air and something I really appreciate. It's not like you have to fall in love, marry that person, then have be your first, and then you
Yeah.
never fall in love again. So, so good. I really love that. And
Yeah.
I think Sarah J. Maas really succeeds at that in her books.
This is not Twilight.
This is not Twilight. um, However, I am not a big fan of the love triangle vibes in this book, which again, another very common trope in the 2000s fiction. See Katniss, Peter
Hmm.
Gale, Bella, Edward Jacob. So, for example, I'm going to give you a quote from the book where we see some love triangle vibes coming through. And this is from Kale's perspective. He didn't understand the rage that arose upon seeing Dorian in the doorway, didn't want to understand that sort of anger. It wasn't jealousy, it was something beyond it, something that transformed his friend into someone else, someone he didn't know. He was fairly certain she was a virgin, but did Dorian know it? It probably made him more interested.
I'm
Ooh.
cringing. Oh my god.
Hello, toxic masculinity. There's just so much in here. The rage, the irrational jealousy when they're not in a relationship at all. The
Yeah.
pitting of two close friends against one another, and then just for kicks, speculation over whether Selena's a virgin or not. Cool. Cool, cool,
Ugh.
cool.
Oh, it's
I don't
great.
love it. I don't love where it takes our characters. I don't love the dynamic it sets up. I don't love it as a plot device. It's not my thing. Also, for me in this book, the romantic banter is not always on point. And again, I think this is something Mass gets better at, but this book, there's like a scene on page 90 where Chaos says that Selena smells like a fish. And I literally wrote on my page, is this what passes for banter in this book? Like, is
Oh
this meant to
my
be
god.
sexy? Is this meant to be fun? Like, oh, look, they're having banter. No.
Nice,
Yeah.
lovely.
Yeah. It can be a little bit cringy. I'm not a huge fan.
Yeah.
How about you,
Oh
KK?
man. I feel like we're ruining it for everybody. We are a wet blanket today. No, but this is all truthful stuff that I think that a lot of people, I mean, there are people out there who talk about it, but I do think that there are so many fans. It can sometimes be difficult to talk about some of the things that might be problematic in the novels, like pitting friends against each other and toxic masculinity.
Mhm.
So, um, but I am in agreement with you. I like that there is very little romance in Throne of Glass. And don't get me wrong, I do love a good romantasy. I love romantasy. But Throne of Glass doesn't feel like the right novel or the right time for Selena to get romantically involved. And this is really apparent when she's having a very hard time actually kissing Dorian. Arguably, again, the most eligible bachelor in all of Adarlan and a complete smoke show. I mean, that should not be like the only determining factor for kissing a guy, but
It
I
helps.
mean, it helps. This is, but the reason for this, and Selena, I don't think really realized, again, she needs therapy, is she's grieving Sam's death. Like, that death destroyed her. While we don't get much information about who Sam was until later in the series or in The Assassin's Blade, if you choose to read that first, but in chapter 20 of Throne of Glass, there's a really tender scene between Dorian and Selena. Dorian goes to visit Selena in her chambers, but finds that she is playing the piano, pianoforte, I think, and just lost in her own world. She is like in a safe space, she is with her music, and the piece that she's playing sounds really mournful and filled with longing and sorrow. A few paragraphs later, she tells Dorian very simply his name was Sam. Then he died. And that the way, just the way that she says it, the entire scene is just, it's so raw. It's too raw, in fact. And if Selena were to become involved with someone, it would be a disaster. She's not ready. She has a lot of healing to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing that I thought of. Like, she's not ready.
Yeah, I
It's
also
too
just
much.
love that scene with the piano. It's one of the best scenes in the book, I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
We're going to touch on some things that we might want to pay attention to for later books in this series. But when we were putting together this episode, we came across so many goodies and lore and theories and some big red herrings that we are
Hmm.
saving those for a next episode, a part two to this episode.
Yeah.
There might even be some Akatar theories in there too.
Oh,
Hmm.
what?
So yes, we know there's lots more we could talk about here, but we're going to save some of that for our next episode.
Okay, so let's just talk about really briefly a few things that we wish there were more of. I feel like we've already harped on a lot about this, but let's just give it a quick Coles Notes summary.
Sure. So I think for me, Selena was a little bit of a one dimensional character. I wish we'd had more time to see her interacting with Nehemia, less time flirting with Dorian
Yeah.
and or Kale. I also wished for a bit more of the stuff outside of the competition, some of the world building, the magic, the history. And although I know we're going to get there later in the series, I just still wanted a bit more on the page here rather than just the promise
Mm.
of what's to come.
Yeah, I agree with you. I wish there was more character growth for Selena, and I know that is the first to 7 books, but like there needs to be more. On a personal level, I found her to be extremely petulant and immature. But she has so much potential. So I think that's what frustrated me a lot. Like again with that scene with Dorian and her playing the pianoforte, there was just a small glimpse into there. She has a really rich backstory that could lend itself to some really deep insights. And I mean, even if Maas had planted the seeds for some insights for her for future, I think I would have been like, okay. But it was just flat. She is flawed. Like Selena is obviously very flawed, but I don't think flawed in a way that Maas intended. Again, it's like Selena has very little introspection, and therefore very little character growth. And in my humble opinion, she needs to grow a lot, a lot, a lot, a lot. So I know wet blanket, but it is what it is.
We're
It
here
is
to
what it
give you
is.
our honest opinions.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's time, KJ, our rating. What are you going to give
Oh,
Throne of
oh
Glass?
man. So this was hard for me to do, but I give it a 2.5 stars. This is the fourth time I've listened to or read Throne of Glass, and knowing where the series goes and what we're in for, and having read a lot of contemporary novels, some really fabulous fantasy that is coming out now, I struggled hard to give this a 3. So I do think for the purpose like for these purposes, it needs a 2.5. I think the prose was clunky. I wish Selena's character arc wasn't quite so flat. And some of the tropes and problems are a bit too, well, they're problematic. Yeah. So again, I think it's a 2.5 stars for me. What about you?
Yeah, I gave this a 2 stars, which I was
Uh,
surprised by. But partly what I did was I looked at our rating scale, which hopefully we'll have up on the screen here,
yeah.
and I decided that based on that scale, I'm giving this a 2. And I was looking back to Ruthless Vows, which we gave a 3 stars, and this book just
Mm-hmm.
doesn't hold up to how I felt about Ruthless Vows. So it wouldn't seem fair to rate it at the same level, even though I was like, but it's such a it's
Yeah.
25 million copies sold. It's such a
Yeah.
a pillar of the
Yeah.
fantasy world at this point. It's such a big part of like my reading journey, but it didn't warrant it for me. I think you can
Yeah.
see so much of the potential of Mass as a writer in this book, and I have a lot of respect and love for the world that she is building. But honestly, I struggled to get through this reread.
Yeah, I think like as you were saying that too, I think like I don't know if I'm getting this right, but there's almost like a Mandela effect around particularly the Throne of Glass series where 25 million copies sold. It is a huge bestseller. It has raging rabid fandom. I am also might be a little bit part of the fandom, but it's so much so I feel like that we don't actually see acknowledge some of the problems like
Mm,
that she there's sometimes she still inserts these problems into her later novels, and I think that we do need to be talking about this. We can be fans, but talk about the problems
Mm,
so we can demand better in the future.
yeah,
That makes sense. Yeah.
totally.
Oh, I feel like people are gonna come at us now. I'm scared.
I'll defend you, KJ.
Oh, thank you.
It's now time for us to talk about some reader likes. So, we've already shared a couple of books that were contemporaries of Throne of Glass, that if you love this series, you'll probably love those, and we will drop those in the description below. Obviously, the biggest reader likes, read next, are the rest of the Maas verse, if you haven't read them
Mhm.
yet. KJ, do you have anything you want to recommend?
Yeah, I particularly loved Legendborn by Tracy Dion. I think that if you liked Throne of Glass but don't want the problems, then read Tracy Dion. I'm just saying. I haven't read the second one yet, and I know that there's a third coming out, but I appreciate that she's departed significantly from the not like other girls trope. And of course, we have a black main female character who is strong in all of the good ways.
Mm,
She learns to harness her roots, actually called root magic, which is a nod to black ancestry, family, and lore. It's also based around the legend of King Arthur, but in a completely new way. And that I love that Dion has taken a very patriarchal legend and completely turned it on its head. It in so many ways. It's so good. I love it.
that
Read
one has
it.
been
Read
on
it.
my TBR list for a while, so I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to pick that up. And for me, I recently read A Magic Steeped in Poison. So if you're looking for a competition based book that's been published a little bit more recently, I believe it came out in 2023, A Magic Steeped in Poison by Judy I. Lin. This is a fantasy book that draws on Chinese myth and legend. I really loved the magic system that was used in this book, where tea is magic.
That's so cool.
So cool. It's so well done. And the court intrigue vibes also make this a good comp for Throne of Glass. So if you enjoy, you know, the imperial
Mhm.
politics and backstabbing, there's a lot of that in A Magic Steeped in Poison. There's also some good friendship in this book, which I appreciated, and a dash of
Yeah.
romance if that is important to
Okay, well, I'm sold.
you.
Add it to my towering TBR. Well, I think we've done enough damage. Don't come at us. So every time I say something that's like slightly critiquey about any Sarah J. Maas books, people are not happy with me. That's fine. Like, it's fine. This is what we do too. And I think we have a responsibility, both as readers, us as writers and authors, to talk about where we can all do better. And I think that we can all do better. And again, I still love the series. You can love it. Just talk about the things that are not working and why. I think it makes us better people all around, better
Mhm.
humans. Yeah. So if you are still with us, tune in next time. We do have all of the Easter eggs and lore in our next episode. I went way down in the rabbit hole. This is what I do.
We're
It
just
pairs
gonna
well with a
school you
Chianti on a
on
Saturday
what the
night.
internet has to say about
Yeah.
how all this connects together.
There are so many theories out there. I spend hours just going, oh my God, this is too much. Anyways, subscribe, like, leave a comment. Let us know what you think. Keep it polite.
Yeah,
we're,
like if
we're
you did
shy.
disagree with us, like
Yeah.
politely tell us, like what did we get
Yeah.
wrong, or how do you see things differently? We'd love to have the conversation with you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
bye.